ordered the government to go to the FBI, which now we believe has possession of that private server, to look and see what material might still be available on
Ron Helbing.
That's right. The FBI now has a server. We have been told that the server's been wiped. We have been told that the server could still be read in some manner by the proper forensic experts. We have been told many, many different things about both the technology of this and about the legalities of this. I don't think there's any question at this point, as the judge said, that some kind of a policy was not followed here. We would not be where we are today. I think the question at this point is going to be whether or not she broke the law. And former Attorney General Michael Mukasey has made a case for saying that in the Wall Street Journal, in an op-ed, that the secretary broke the law and needs to be dealt with as someone who, at the very minimum, showed extremely poor judgment in her handling of government documents, and beyond that, may have exposed herself to some kind of criminal indictment. Now, we've seen before such eminent people as General Petraeus have to come to terms with the loose way in which they handled government documents that were classified. She may say that she didn't know they were classified. They may not be nearly as important as some of the things that the general was handling, but he in the end had to settle with the Justice Department and cop a plea, essentially, pay a large fine, and face even more severe penalties had the case come out in that way.
Gardner Harris, welcome back from 3 years in India.
Thank
to
you,
your new post.
Sure.
What's your take on this?
Well, obviously, I think going forward, one of the big takes is the political take. What does all this mean for the presidential campaign going forward? And, scandals become important when they seem to reveal something deep and important about a character, right? And so the Hillary Clinton email scandal is important because it goes to this notion that Hillary is a secretive character, that she, sort of never apologizes, and that she is not being straightforward in this. And certainly she had a press conference this week that I think most observers suggested was disastrous, because she really failed to kind of acknowledge to anyone that there was a problem whatsoever with her email use. And why can't she? Now, there was also this really interesting set to between her and a Black Lives Matter activists. And it was another one of those circumstances. In that one, she came off a little bit better, but in that situation, even though she now agrees that the previous policies of both her husband and herself, that were very tough on crime policies, tough sentencing laws, had a profoundly negative effect, she couldn't even in that circumstance say, you know what, looking back, we probably made a mistake. And that was wrong. Now, why can't she do the same thing about the email? Why can't she just sort of say, look, I had some concerns about using my public email because I'd been gone after multiple times. I really wanted to kind of control this. Looking back, that looks like that was a mistake. I think that she would go a long way toward putting this at least somewhat politically behind her if she was able to do that.
Do you think she could do that, Susan?
Well, I think, could she do it? Could she put it behind her?
Yeah.
I think this is no longer in a situation where an apology,
no
while
matter
helpful,
what she says,
would put this behind her. It might put her on a better track with some voters who would like to hear something that seems a little more straightforward from her. But this is an investigation that we're going to be dealing with for months and months to come, because there's an investigation now at the FBI. There are investigations with the House Benghazi Committee. We've got freedom of information requests still pending. That was what the judge was talking about yesterday. So this is going to be around for a while. And what Hillary Clinton and her campaign have failed to do is follow rule number one when you have a scandal, which is find out what happened, put everything out there to avoid this kind of drip, drip, drip of disclosure. That's exactly what they've been seeing. This has been, to some degree, in the air for a lot longer than 6 months. I mean, the Times took the story to another level in March of this year, but there was talk about her handling of her emails back as far as 2013. There was an opportunity for them to have taken a totally different approach to this, but it appears, and of course we don't want to psychoanalyze here, but it appears that a decision was made at the highest levels, shall we say, of the Clinton operation, that they were not going to give any ground on this, that they didn't want to see the server turned over to anyone other than themselves, and they thought like they could basically stonewall their way through.
Do we know who at the State Department gave permission for her to carry on this way?
I do not know.
The State Department at their briefings have sidestep questions, repeated questions from reporters about, did anyone approve it? Who was that? Did anyone object? Did anyone say, no, this is not the right way to proceed? That's one of the questions that eventually we're going to find out the answer to. There's an answer to that question. We don't know it yet.
Somewhere.
So at some point, we're going to find out.
Well, the apex of the decision-making process at the State Department.
Is her.
Right,
right.
So
Secretary of
to whom would
State.
she be turning
Yeah.
for permission?
Okay, and then the question becomes, how is this affecting the rest of the Democratic campaign, Gardner?
Well, of course, there is this sense in the Democratic polls that she's wounded, and it's one of the reasons why Joe Biden is now very publicly starting to mull whether to sort of join the race. Now, whether he's serious, whether the people who are talking to him are serious or just trying to get him out of the deep depression that he admitted that he was in as a result of the death of his son Beau, is a little unclear. He said that he's going to make a decision next month in September. It's going to be a very busy month politically and on the Hill. But to some extent, he can sort of remain in the sidelines for a long time. I mean, I think what we all tend to forget is now in the glow of Joe Biden's vice presidency, he and the president have become almost like brothers. Joe Biden was a miserable presidential candidate. He tried it before. It didn't really work.
What about Bernie Sanders and how his numbers are being affected?
Bernie Sanders is the phenomenon of the Democratic field. Who would have really, before, when he announced, even did any of us think he would be doing so well against Hillary Clinton?
Well, I didn't think he'd be doing badly, frankly, when he was on.
But he's doing
program.
Extraordinarily well, and
He
he's getting
certainly
big
is.
crowds and enthusiastic crowds. And Hillary Clinton, I think, is still the presumptive Democratic nominee, and she's got money and an organization and a history, and the possibility of making history herself by being the nominee and perhaps the president. But Bernie Sanders has managed to tap enthusiasm that Hillary Clinton so far has not been able to do. And that is a remarkable thing.
Yes, it's three things, really. You've got the fact that Hillary Clinton is not waltzing to the nomination. We use the word that her campaign likes to use. And they, of course, say they never expected to, but I think they pretty much expected to. And then number two, you've got the fact that there are a number of issues out there that motivate the Democratic base, much as we're seeing on the Republican side. There are hardcore issues that are motivating many Republican voters. And on the Democratic side, there is an anger at income inequality, not just wow, that's an interesting issue, but mad, angry people who really want to go after them. He's been talking about that forever. He's been talking about that since the 70s. And then thirdly, there's the phenomenon of his personality, which fits this all perfectly.
Rodney Alping of NPR, Susan Page of USA Today, and Gardner Harris of the New York Times, all here to answer your questions after a short break. Stay with us. with the domestic hour of the Friday News Roundup. This week with Susan Page of USA Today, Ron Elving of NPR, and Gardner Harris of the New York Times. Donald Trump, Jeb Bush held dueling town hall meetings in New Hampshire. They really went after each other, Gardner. How real is this?
Well, of course, Donald Trump has been going after everyone, for a long, long time. So that wasn't new. What is new, of course, is that the rest of the field is sort of splitting up into two different camps as to how to deal with Donald Trump. And Jeb Bush is now decidedly in, Lindsey Graham sort of started this. Jeb Bush is now there in terms of attacking Trump. Is that the right strategy? Nobody quite knows. Obviously, the big question of the Republican campaign is, what does one do about the Donald? He is a phenomenon. I think and just most recently, this past week, there's been a lot of sort of stories about, is the Donald going to continue? I think there was most professional observers of this race thought that he was summer fling, right? That you fall in love in the summer with, the guy with the big chest and the bouffant hair, and then you settle down with someone serious like Jeb Bush in the winter. But the winter is bleeding into the fall with the Donald still in many people's hearts, and that's beginning really start to panic the field. And Jeb is right there in that panic.
You know what? One thing I think that has happened over the past week is that establishment Republican figures are now willing to entertain the terrifying possibility that Donald Trump could win the nomination. And that didn't happen before. Even when he was leading national polls, people said there's no way that the Republican Party would nominate Donald Trump. But he's shown some, but the experts have been wrong every step of the way when it comes to Donald Trump. He continues to do really well. He's only in the new CNN ORC poll that came out yesterday. He's only 6 points behind Hillary Clinton in a head-to-head matchup. And his critique of Jeb Bush, who used to be the front runner, used to be assumed to be the front runner before he got into this race. What he said Wednesday night at these dueling town halls was that Jeb Bush is a low energy person. I don't see how he's electable. And if you went to the Jeb Bush town hall, which was about 20 miles away in New Hampshire, Jeb Bush was making his case against Trump, but he did seem like kind of a low energy person.
If Bernie Sanders is a mild surprise, Donald Trump is a huge shock to the system. No question about it. And he has gone farther than anyone would ever imagined. And we all assumed, and I think we have to say we all assumed, that as soon as he started saying outrageous things like what he said about John McCain, what he said about Megyn Kelly, what he says about everybody, people would start to peel away and say, no, that's not a presidential candidate. That's just a summer show. Well, he keeps saying these things and his numbers don't go down. Now, we should always note that we're talking about him leading in a very large field. So with 20 or 25%, depending on what state and what poll, he has the most points. At the same time, is only 20 or 25% of one half of the voters, Republicans and Republican leaners. So it's a fraction of a fraction. It is not necessarily a majority of Americans giving their hearts to Donald Trump. All the polls still show that there is more resistance to him being the Republican nominee among Republicans than for any other candidate. And that poll that shows him just 6 points behind Hillary Clinton, I think is one of those summer polls where we're measuring heat. Obviously, Hillary Clinton is dropping in terms of her heat, and Donald Trump is still as hot as he's ever been.
Well, and Diane, I mean, let's be clear. Republicans want to win. And Donald Trump, according to everything we know, and we are often wrong, let's acknowledge that, cannot win. His negatives are like 60%. There are huge majorities of Americans who say they would rather rot in hell than vote for Donald Trump as a presidential candidate, right? So it is hard. It is this huge field. He's got large numbers because the more stable people, I'm trying to be nice here, have distributed their votes over a lot of various candidates. You would figure that as the nomination process goes along, the winnowing will happen amongst these establishment folks like Jeb and like Rubio.
You know what? It makes me think that the Brits have it right, that the term of the campaign ought to be much shorter, winnowing out the way outs before you even get started.
That does look awfully attractive at
It
this point, doesn't
certainly
it?
does.
And Canada does it much the same way. The rest of the world does it some other way. Nobody wants to have a 2-year campaign except us. But let's also remember that in that winnowing process, which we've always counted on in the past, we have a hiccup, which is billionaires and other big money donors who can say, I'm going to keep my guy in there. I've paid some pretty good money to have a presidential candidate, and I want to see him run as long as possible. So the old mechanism, which was you ran out of money, you had to go home, that's not operative.
Where is Trump's money coming from besides his own?
Trump's money is coming from his own.
From Trump.
Yeah, and I
Okay.
think I would love to see the fundraiser trying to raise money for Donald Trump, right? Because what would you target billionaires who had more billions than he had? Who would you target exactly if you're fundraising for Donald Trump?
Do you remember Ross Perot saying, I'll take some donations because people need to have skin in the game?
You know, I would say one thing. I think we should stop making predictions about Donald Trump and the limits to how
absolutely.
far he can go, because
Yeah.
we've been nothing but wrong. So let's see. It's up to, it's not up to us. It's up to voters. Americans get to decide
Well,
if this
it's,
is somebody they want to
I mean, I
nominate.
think people are really looking now toward even March. You have the SEC primary in March. You have, beginning after the SEC primary, the primaries begin to turn from apportionment primaries where people get, essentially the amount that of the vote, to winner take all primaries. So, for the Republicans, I think a lot of people were thinking that the Donald would fizzle out by the fall. I think many of them are thinking, okay, we may be seeing this show through March of next year, which is really extraordinary. And just a plug for us political reporters, Diane, I mean, this 2-year system is great for our business.
sure.
Most
Well,
things
but
have been going the wrong
people-
way for us, but this is
people
great.
are tired of it already. And they tell me they're tired of it already. They wonder why we even talk about it. But the fact of the matter is it's happening. And we do need to talk about it.
I think one effect of Donald Trump and of the email controversy on the
Yes.
other side is that it takes up all our attention, so that there might be an interesting campaign about healthcare policy. 3 of the
Right.
Republicans have come up with healthcare plans now, or about education policy, or about Common Core, or about the U.S. role in the world. But that is, and there are some candidates who have tried to talk to some degree about issues, but that's not getting any traction because we are taken with these more entertainment.
Is that our fault?
Partly our fault.
All of
Yeah.
our news organizations have covered many of the substantive things that are said by these candidates. We have. It plays maybe in a little different part of the paper or maybe a little different part of the program, and people might have to listen a little longer or look a little harder to find it. It's there, but we follow the audience. We follow what the audience wants to
24
hear.
million people tuned
Exactly.
into that Fox News
And
debate.
it
okay?
wasn't
And
to see
I
Ted
was
Cruz.
with them, as was my entire family, and it was riveting TV. You have to give the moderators of the Fox News debate some real credit. They asked some really tough questions, and those candidates evidently squirmed. It was hard to take your eyes off. I mean, we had some, pie going in the kitchen at the time, and I couldn't get to it because it was so good. I mean, let's count our blessings. We are having an extraordinary primary with some crazy stuff happening, and it's riveting.
I want to get to some other issues of substance. President Obama has given the Shell oil company clearance to begin drilling for oil in the Arctic. Tell us why and how this affects his reputation as an environmental savior.
Well, it certainly is not going to improve his reputation as an environmental savior in the eyes of the environmental movement. They're very upset about it. People and many editorialists are highly upset about it. Hillary Clinton, the person we've already talked about, broke with the president quite openly and said she would not have approved it. Perhaps some people want to be suspicious, see it as a conspiracy that Obama made this decision so that Hillary could split with him and have a better profile on environmental issues herself.
Well, why did he do it?
Because he has pursued, and this does not necessarily comport with most people's impression. But, amongst all the other things that he has done to restrain fossil fuels and the war on coal that we've heard so much about, this has been a rather balanced administration with respect to permitting much more development of fossil fuels in this country through things like fracking and offshore drilling. They have had what they would call a balanced approach. Other people would call schizophrenic or mixed, but they have not been the 100% on the side of the environmentalist administration that many people wanted or expected.
Consider how low the cost of a barrel of oil is right now.
Extraordinary, about $40 a
Right.
barrel. And actually, no signs that's going to change for two reasons. Other producing companies, including Saudi Arabia, continue to pump as much oil as they possibly can, even though the price is low. And the world's number 2 energy using country, China, is going into an economic downturn that will probably means that they'll reduce their energy demands. So the price of oil is low,
So
which is good for
why-
American drivers, right? Gas is
Okay.
bad for some of these energy
So
companies.
why drill off the Arctic coast?
The first job I had out of college, Diane, was in the oil of the New York Mercantile Exchange, where we touted the price of oil around the world for all day long. It was then memorialized in a movie with Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy. So nobody, and I didn't know then, one of the reasons why I got out of the pits was I had no idea where the price of oil was going to go. Nobody really knows now. But this technology that has allowed fracking. So the larger issue is that Obama has always said that he has an all of the above policy, right? And what has happened in the United States is the United States is now an energy superpower. We're going to talk about Jimmy Carter later and his cancer. We remember Jimmy Carter with his sweater in the White House, the OPEC oil embargo. Now the United States is largely energy independent. Sometime in the next couple of years, we're simply going to stop importing oil. Who would have thought that we would have been at this position? We have doubled our production of oil in just the last 4 to 5 years. It is an extraordinary moment. And that is as a result of this directional drilling technology and the fracking technology. Now, there's every reason to believe that technology, which is almost exclusively used now in the United States, is going to proliferate around the world. China is going to finally figure this out. It hasn't figured it out. India is going to finally figure it out. It hasn't figured it out. And so probably the guesses are, and again, I will admit that despite being in the pits, I have no idea where the price is going to go, but most people believe that the price is going to stay low for a long time. And Saudi Arabia, which used to be able to have this extraordinary power over the price of oil through OPEC, has decided that they have to open the spigots because they are among the lowest cost producers in the world. Just to maintain their some revenue, they've got to make it cheap.
Because they're also hoping that if oil gets cheap enough, they can still make money, and the frackers and all the people in the rest of the world who have higher production costs will back off a little bit.
And the hope for you is that the Arctic will be too expensive, right? That's, even though Obama has said yes to Shell, it's a really expensive place to take oil out of. And as long as oil remains in that $40 a barrel area, it's going to be hard for people to justify going up to those very difficult spots.
Gardner Harris, New York Times, and you're listening to the Diane Rehm Show. At the same time, you've got the president going to New Orleans next week for the 10th anniversary of Katrina. And talk about environmental issues, how much repair has been done, how much recovery has been done, Gardner.
So I was in Katrina. I was the one who walked through St. Rita's nursing home for the first time. And, in my bare feet in the mud, saw those 38 bodies, some of them wrapped in shower curtains, many of them in their wheelchairs. It was a terrible, terrible event. And it, I think what President Obama is going to be arguing this year in multiple places, he's going on Monday to Las Vegas. He's going on Thursday to New Orleans. The following week, he's going to go up to the Arctic. And every single one of these places, he's going to start talking about about climate change. And his message is that disasters like Katrina look like they are going to become more and more and more common. We just had the story out of the New York Times yesterday about how the drought in California is almost certainly worsened, according to these studies, because of climate change. I just came back from India, Diane, and I lived in New Delhi, and New Delhi routinely has temperatures that are 120 degrees, 25 million people living in that heat. And that's, only a few degrees temperature up. And more and more and more people die. I think his message of the end of his presidency is increasingly about this very thing, climate change.
I think that this is obviously going to present a problem for the president, partly because of what we were talking about earlier and this balanced program of encouraging domestic energy production. And when he then goes to New Orleans, when he goes to these other places, when he talks about climate change as part of the problem, in Louisiana, the oil industry has been enormously important to them economically. And he has tried to deal with both those questions. He's tried to wrestle with the economic questions of what it does to the economy when the oil industry goes down, when the energy industry suffers. And we're seeing that even in the stock market, where obviously what's going on in China may be the largest driver and most dramatic thing going on, but the lower prices of oil are also depressing prices. So a president has to deal with all of that. He can't just say, I'm for restraining climate change. I want us to change our behavior over the long period of time. He also has to deal with the economic conditions of the day and the place.
And just having low prices of oil, Diane, there's no way probably that he could have had this Iran deal, that he could have persuaded all of these countries to give up Iranian oil if the price had been $100, $150, $200 a barrel. So it was, in fact, it was precisely because of this fracking technology, the all of the above thing, the explosion in production in the United States, that the United States was able to get this international coalition to get Iran to the table. So this whole thing that is happening in the oil industry has enormous repercussions diplomatically, militarily, across the world.
Well, we've also got the Fed meeting in July, and we still don't know whether interest rates are going to move up next month very quickly.
Well, we know the Fed has agreed that they want to raise interest rates. They just are a little shy about doing it until they're sure the recovery is really going well.
All right, short break here. Your calls when we come back. Stay with us. And a quick reminder, you can watch our first hour of the Friday News Roundup by going to drshow.org. Click on Watch Live. Another point on the Fed. The Dow is dropping precipitously. I don't know what that's a word I ought to be using. It's currently down about 200 points. How is the activity of the Dow and China's monetary situation going to affect the Fed's decision as to whether to raise rates?
The Fed is watching. The Fed is watching these markets. The Fed is asking itself, can we go ahead and raise rates as we know we need to do? As we know we need to do. There's agreement on that. But can we do it now in September as we more or less had agreed to do? I mean, we were really expecting this to happen. Can we do that if the market is in a full-blown correction? And we seem to be heading towards that territory. We lost 2% yesterday. We're at 1.33% down today. And that's just measuring the Dow. There are lots of other measurements. We all talk about the Dow. And the Fed is not going to want to raise interest rates at the moment when we're in a 5 to 10% correction on the markets, because it is going to be perceived as a torpedo into a stumbling recovery.
What do you think, Susan?
You know, I think that's right. It's hard to imagine if this is the situation they're facing in the next few weeks that they would raise interest rates. Now, that said, there's also concern that at some point interest rates have to go up, if only to give you a tool to use the next time the economy has a downturn, as we know it will. That is the primary tool that the Federal Reserve has. They don't have it in their pocket now because interest rates are effectively zero.
Gardner.
They have two roles, Diane. They to fight inflation and to keep employment high. And the present chairwoman of the Fed, Janet Yellen, has for years thought that the Fed leaned too far over to preventing inflation and didn't pay enough attention about employment. So she is a skeptic about raising rates. They have all sort of said that it's got to happen and all that. But you got to think with Janet Yellen in charge, it's going to happen later than it might have under someone else's leadership.
All right, we're going to open the phones 800-433-8850. First to King, North Carolina. Hi, Rick. You're on the air.
Hi, Diane. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can. Go right ahead, sir.
I won't belabor this, but I've been listening to you for almost a decade. I love your show.
Thank you.
And I've tried calling in so many times. I'm just enamored that I actually was able to get in. So here's my main comment, and I'd be interested to see what your panel has to say. With the Hillary Clinton, email server, the BlackBerry, the thumb drive, etc. There's one thing that you've got the judicial, the law.
Quickly, sir, please.
Okay. So, irrespective of that, I mean, how does she maintain her trustworthiness, being that she just continues year after year after year, skirting laws and whatnot, even if she's doing it within the law?
That is the political question. It isn't the legal question, but it is the political question, which ultimately will determine whether or not she can be the standard bearer for the Democratic Party. If she has taken so much damage on this issue, as many polls suggest she has, because of that honest and trustworthy assessment question that pollsters often ask, if she has taken on so much damage because of this question that she cannot be considered honest and trustworthy by people outside the hardcore of the Democratic Party, then it can end her candidacy.
All right, let's go now to Mike in Cincinnati, Ohio. You're on the air.
I just had a comment on your treatment of Donald Trump as a candidate, and I continue to be astounded that you really don't address him as a credible candidate. You keep trying to marginalize him. And I think the poll number, he just keeps going up in the polls. And instead of trying to marginalize the guy and act astounded that he's still doing well in the polls, I don't understand why you can't just address the the issues and the viewpoints he's presenting.
All right. Thanks for your
You know,
call.
Mike, I completely agree with you. I think we should take him seriously. I think we should treat him the way we
Absolutely.
treat other candidates. We should ask him for policy positions, for instance, what we to do about some of the problems he identifies and analyze those. And that is actually starting to happen. You know, now he's come out with somewhat more detailed on an immigration plan, for instance.
Well, now wait a minute. Let's talk about this immigration plan, because he's saying you're going to build a higher, longer wall, and you're going to arrest 11 million people and export them.
You're going to do, yes. Now, see, so this is the discussion we should have. Not isn't he a joke, but here's his plan. Does it make any sense? Because what he has said various things. You know, he's not the most consistent in his rhetoric, but on this immigration plan, he apparently wants to take all the illegal immigrants who are in the United States.
Right.
We think there are about 11 million of them, to send them all back home, identify the good ones, although he's not very specific about how you would do that, and allow them to come back.
And this is to be done by massive deportation. And that would also entail more than 11 million, because when he was asked, what would you do with undocumented people who are here and living with their families who are legal, he'd say they all have to go. They all have to go. We'll just round them up. We don't want to separate families. That would be bad.
Yeah,
so we're going to round them all up and ship them back where they came from.
But what
wherever that may
about
be.
the children? Wasn't there some question about how to label the children?
Well, there was a discussion with Jeb Bush about his use of his reference to the term anchor babies, which I think many Hispanics see as a derogatory term. And Jeb Bush said that if this is a case of people pregnant women intentionally coming into the United States to have children who will then be U.S. citizens, that's something that we should try to deal with through enforcement. Then he was challenged on his use of the term, and he had a kind of heated back and forth with a reporter about that.
And the other thing, Diane, is that he's openly acknowledged that many of his policies are not there or are paper thin. I mean, he said in an interview that he gets his military wisdom from TV military advisors. You know, he doesn't actually speak to anybody from the military directly. And then later on, he mentioned a couple of military advisors by name that he knows. But the problem with dealing with the Donald as a traditional candidate and using our traditional tools is that he doesn't give us any of the traditional background that we usually have, or very little of it.
Isn't even referring to him as
The
the
Donald.
Donald derogatory. And does that mean that we in the media need to acknowledge he is Donald Trump and not the Donald?
Well, that is his handle, as it were, in the entertainment world from which he emerged. And I'm not talking about his businesses here. I'm talking about things like Celebrity Apprentice and so on. And that is how he has been known in the tabloid world, that he has largely been a dominant figure in. And so we just adopted that. But you're right. It's an entertainment kind of a handle, and it's not the kind of thing that connotes the respect we usually give to candidates. Although we do talk about Bernie when we mean Bernie Sanders.
Well, and
we don't say Senator
Bernie.
Sanders.
Yeah.
Every time.
Well, we say the same thing about Hillary as well,
Yeah.
which is also, I'm not, look, I think the problem for us is that our worlds and the reality TV worlds are beginning to merge, and we're all a little uncomfortable. with
Yeah.
that.
But you know,
I
the
agree.
Huffington Post a while back announced that they would only cover Donald Trump in their entertainment section or part.
Who said
The
that?
Huffington Post. And
Okay.
the Huffington Post editor was on Morning Joe on MSNBC this morning defending this and saying they would continue to do this. That seems like an indefensible position to me. He is clearly a political factor. We should deal with him that way.
All right, let's go to Jim in Dallas, Texas. You're on the air.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, thanks.
I just feel like Hillary Clinton is starting to get the same kind of character assassination that Bill Clinton got in the 90s. Are we going back to the 90s? Is she going to get a sympathy vote for this like he did?
What do you think?
Well, you know, the amazing thing about the Clintons is how differently they managed to handle the various scandals. You know, Bill had these bimbo eruptions happen throughout the beginning of his campaign. And the remarkable thing about Bill Clinton was how nimble he was with each one of those, and how, he in some cases would acknowledge things, he would ask for forgiveness. He sort of managed to seem trustworthy even while having these various difficulties. And in many ways, it's sort of unclear what's going on with the Hillary Clinton emails, right? Most of the secret stuff that might have been in her emails were sent to her. It doesn't look like she actually did much sending of emails herself. I mean, if she gets caught with, she clearly seems to have defied government policy that you use a public email server to preserve records, right? But the use of FOIA, for instance, in the Bush administration was more in the lack than the observance. I mean, my FOIAs took 4 years to come to fruition in the Bush administration. So going around these sort of FOIA rules became somewhat common in the federal government. But even so, she is not nearly as nimble as her husband in acknowledging sort of the problem and seeming trustworthy as a result.
There are a lot of bad things about the campaigns that we have, and they go on too long and they cost too much. But one of the things they do is they test candidates. And this is a test for Hillary Clinton on how she's going to respond and how she's going to fare. And I would just note that Hillary Clinton was the most effective candidate she'd ever been when she was really under the gun in 2008.
All right. Let's talk about some other kinds of testing. 2 extraordinary women with extraordinary endurance who made it through the Army's Ranger School. They really deserve our admiration, our wishes for continued success. What a rigorous kind of undertaking.
I remember picking up a guy on the side of the road. I was going up skiing, and the guy got in my car, and he was a cadaver. And I looked at him and I said, what happened to you? Did you have cancer? And he said, no, I just graduated from Army Ranger School. I mean, these schools are,
what a story, Gardner.
They do calorie restrictions. It's famous down in Fort Benning, Georgia, what they put these people through. And the fact that anybody gets through them is remarkable. I actually think that, in those sort of calorie restrictions, certainly long distance swimming, women do better than men. There are certain things that women just in certain athletic endeavors do better than men. It may be that they actually will do better in some of these calorie restriction environments than men because they have better stores. But these women, essentially what we're really talking about is, do these women change military policy? Must the military, across the military, they've already announced that they are going to open up some of their special operations forces to women. The SEALs, the Marines are acting very nervous right now.
Marines are holding out.
And these women change the dynamic.
They do, and we should name them. First Lieutenant Shay Haver and Captain Kristen Greist. They did it, they made it, they got through, and largely by doing it through the internal dynamics that have always helped people survive the Ranger School, which is you help each other, and you get the trust of your fellow Rangers.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure this has been referred to as brotherhood in the past, and it's going to be a little bit broader now.
So let's congratulate them.
Graduation today, and some of the women who were the early women who went through West Point, I understand, are going to the graduation day to show their support for someone who's I think benefited from the ground they broke as well.
And the saddest story this week. But first, you're listening to the Diane Rehm Show. Jimmy Carter's announcement that he had some growth removed from his liver, and then he thought he was fine, and then it turns out he has lesions in the brain. He does undergo treatment. I think he underwent his first treatment yesterday. What a sad, sad story. And yet he was so upbeat and so courageous in his presentation.
It didn't seem like he didn't seem sad. He said he was perfectly at ease.
I was sad.
What a-
I was
yes.
in tears.
What a life he's had, and he didn't win a second term in the White House, a mixed record as president, but such an admirable record as a former president. The things that he has done for the world as a former president are truly remarkable.
The longest time anyone's lived after leaving the White House, and 35 years it would be in January. And this time he has spent with the Carter Center in particular, fighting disease, lots of peace initiatives, lots of controversy, and many of the things that he has said and written about, for example, Israel, have not made him friends, but they have also made him friends with other people. And he has always taken forthright stands about his views and built on the Camp David Accords, which were the one signal achievement, perhaps, of his presidency.
I was fascinated to learn that he had not told Rosalind, his wife, for 2 weeks about the cancer.
I saw them in Appalachia when I lived in Hazard, Kentucky, and they came to build homes. And he sat down with me, the two of them, and they are the most gracious, open people. He was in Nepal during the earth, in the lead up to the election last year when I was there as well. I mean, he has been everywhere. He is a zealot. And in fact, in this press conference, he was talking about how this is going to change his life. And he talked about how he and Rosalind had talked 20 years ago about, reducing their time at the Carter Center, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and maybe now he'll start reducing his time. But even still, he has things he wants to get done. And the one line that I thought was so great was that he wants the last guinea worm to die before he does, right? Which is this fight against the guinea worm in Africa has been one of his signal fights.
And I was so proud to have President Carter on for the 11th time just a few weeks ago. He was absolutely extraordinary. Whether he already had some inkling, I know not, but he was just as beautiful a man as I have ever seen. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Diana Harris,
Sure.
it's
Thank
good
you.
to have you back. Susan Page, as always, and Ron Elving of NPR. Thanks all for listening. I'm Diane Rehm.
The Diane Rehm Show is produced by Sandra Pinkert, Denise Couture, Rebecca Cookman, Lisa Dunn, Alexandra Botti, Susan Casey, Danielle Knight, and Allison Brody. Our web producer is Erica R. Hendry. The engineer is Toby Schreiner. Natalie Urevlivker answers the phones. Visit drshow.org for audio archives, transcripts, and podcasts. Our email address is drshow@wamu.org. And we're on Facebook and Twitter. This program comes to you from American University in Washington. This is NPR.